For centuries, we've been told that Neanderthals were nothing more than dim-witted brutes, creatures who vanished in the shadows of history while Homo sapiens rose to dominance. But shocking new evidence suggests that this narrative is dangerously incomplete, perhaps even wrong. Harvard geneticist David Reich has revealed a discovery so bold, so unsettling, that it could rewrite everything we thought we knew about human origins. Could it be that Europeans and other non-Africans are not merely distant cousins of Neanderthals, but their direct continuation, carrying within them up to 20% of Neanderthal ancestry? The implications are staggering, but before I reveal the full truth, we need to peel back layers of forgotten history, scientific debate, and buried bones that whisper secrets louder than words. Stay with me, because the revelations ahead may forever change the way you see yourself and your place in the human story. Long before DNA tests and cutting-edge laboratories, the story of Neanderthals began with scattered bones pulled from the soil of Europe, bones that sparked confusion, fear, and fascination in equal measure. In 1856, deep within the limestone caves of the Neander Valley in Germany, workers unearthed fragments of a skull and skeleton so strange that no one could agree whether it belonged to an ancient human, a primitive brute, or some monstrous hybrid. And little did they know that this discovery would ignite one of the greatest scientific debates in history, one that still rages on today. Hermann Schaffhausen, a German anthropologist, examined those remains and suggested they were evidence of a barbarous and savage race wiped out by stronger men. While just a few years later, Irish geologist William King dared to name them a new species entirely Homo. Neanderthals writing in chilling tones about a being whose thoughts never rose beyond the level of the brute. Yet even here, the seeds of doubt were planted, because how could these so-called savages carve tools, hunt with strategy, and survive the brutal ice ages for hundreds of thousands of years if they were truly mindless? That question was quietly buried by prejudice for decades, but the bones kept speaking, whispering of a story too big to ignore. By the 20th century, as more skeletal remains were discovered in France, Croatia, and the Middle East, scientists began piecing together a picture of a species that looked eerily like us. Shorter, stockier, but with brains as large, sometimes larger than modern humans. This was not the image of a dull-witted caveman, though the stereotype was convenient and stuck, cemented in public imagination by cartoons and museum dioramas. The truth, however, was already beginning to fracture through the surface. In 1962, anthropologists meeting in Austria voted to classify Neanderthals not as a separate species, but as a subspecies of Homo sapiens, branding them Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, and for a brief moment it seemed consensus had been reached, until new theories, new fossils, and eventually new genetics shattered that fragile agreement. But here lies the real twist. The part that was deliberately softened for decades. Neanderthals were not just neighbors, not just competitors, they were family, and some of them may well have walked alongside our ancestors in the same caves, the same valleys, and perhaps even raised children together. I'll hold back the full extent of that interbreeding for now. You'll see why in a moment, but what matters is this. Every bone pulled from the earth was screaming that the line between Neanderthal and human was not as sharp as textbooks wanted us to believe. The 1980s saw Chris Stringer of the British Museum argue that Neanderthals were a distinct species, pointing to fossil overlaps in the Middle East between our kind and theirs. Yet this only deepened the mystery, because the evidence suggested not replacement, but coexistence, interaction, and something more intimate. And here's the haunting detail. When modern humans first stepped into Europe some 45,000 years ago, Neanderthals were still there, waiting, watching, surviving, and perhaps wondering who these strange new arrivals were. For nearly 10,000 years, they lived side by side, two kinds of human beings inhabiting the same lands, sometimes clashing, sometimes mingling, and ultimately leaving behind a legacy hidden not just in caves and stone tools, but within our very blood. The question we now face is not whether Neanderthals were human, but whether we are Neanderthal, and, as I'll soon reveal, the answer is far more shocking than most people are ready to accept. Stay tuned, because the deeper we dig into this, mystery, the more we'll uncover a truth that will make you question what it really means to be human, and whether the so-called extinction of the Neanderthals ever truly happened at all. For decades, the bones alone could only tell part of the story, but when scientists began unlocking the code of ancient DNA in the late 20th and early 21st century, the whispers of the past turned into something impossible to ignore. The Neanderthal genome was first sequenced in 2010, and with it came a revelation so extraordinary that it shook the scientific world to its core. Non-African humans alive today carry Neanderthal DNA, a genetic echo that proves beyond doubt our ancestors did not simply kill off these beings, they intermingled with them, sometimes violently, sometimes intimately, and the children of those unions are our ancestors. But here's where the plot thickens. Initially, researchers reported that only about 2 to 3% of the genomes of Europeans and Asians came from Neanderthals, a figure that sounded small enough to make the legacy seem negligible, almost trivial, a detail easily ignored. Yet Harvard geneticist David Reich dropped a bombshell by arguing that this number hides a far greater truth. While the DNA percentage is small today, due to tens of thousands of years of natural selection gradually weeding out certain Neanderthal genes, the actual proportion of ancestors who were Neanderthal is closer to 10 to 20%. Think about that for a moment. 1 in every 5 of your ancestors, if you are of non-African descent, was Neanderthal. This isn't a footnote, it is a revelation that challenges our very identity. And yet I won't reveal just yet what traits we carry from them. You'll need to stay with me because those details are as surprising as they are unsettling. What we can say now is that Neanderthals were not some fringe species watching us from afar. They were woven into the fabric of who we are. But if that's true, then why have we been told for so long that they were different, lesser, or extinct? The answer lies partly in the politics of science and partly in our fear of what it means to blur the line between us and them. Early anthropologists used Neanderthals as a cautionary tale, casting them as failures who couldn't keep pace with the superior Homo sapiens. But genetic evidence tells a more complicated story, one where the so-called victors are not pure conquerors, but hybrids of the very beings they supposedly defeated. Even more tantalizing is the fact that when geneticists looked at early Homo sapiens fossils from around 45,000 years ago, they found chunks of Neanderthal DNA that were much larger and more recent than the fragments we see today, meaning interbreeding happened often, and in the early generations the Neanderthal presence in our blood was far stronger. Over time, through countless generations, some of that DNA was lost, diluted, or removed. But make no mistake, it was there, and it shaped us. Now here's a secret I'll reveal later: certain Neanderthal genes remain alive within us and influence not just our bodies, but our behaviors, our health, even our vulnerability to diseases. But before we get to that, we must pause and consider the raw implications. Neanderthals did not vanish, they survived in us, becoming part of the lineage we call human. And yet, despite this undeniable evidence, debates continue to rage among paleoanthropologists. Some insist Neanderthals were a separate species, Homo neanderthalensis. Others say they were merely a subspecies of us, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. But whichever label you prefer, the genetic record refuses to play along with neat categories. We were not as separate as once believed. We shared beds, fires, and blood. And if you think this makes Neanderthals our equals rather than our inferiors, hold that thought, because the story of their disappearance and why our lineage ultimately prevailed reveals a much darker truth about survival, culture, and perhaps even violence. We are only just beginning to pull on the thread, and the unraveling has only started. Stay tuned, because in the next chapter we'll explore how archaeology and anthropology expose a side of Neanderthal life that appends every stereotype, forcing us to ask whether the real difference between them and us was intelligence, adaptability, or something far more sinister. If Neanderthals truly live on in us, then to understand ourselves we must first understand who they really were. And here is where archaeology begins to tear apart the old cliches of brutish cavemen stumbling through the Ice Age. For more than a century, popular imagination has reduced them to hulking, knuckle-dragging primitives, yet every shovel of soil, every artifact pulled from the ground tells a different story, one of intelligence, resilience, and a culture far richer than we were ever taught. Take, for instance, the evidence of burial. Neanderthal graves have been discovered across Europe and the Middle East, some accompanied by tools, bones, and even flowers, a ritual act that whispers of symbolism, of respect for the dead, of a mind capable of grappling with loss and perhaps even belief in something beyond life. Could this have been religion in its earliest form? I'll leave that question hanging for now, because the answer is more complex than it seems. Equally compelling are the pigments and engravings found in caves once occupied by Neanderthals, markings that many researchers now argue are deliberate. Art, the beginnings of symbolic communication once thought unique to Homo sapiens. If Neanderthals painted, carved, and buried their dead, then where exactly do we draw the line between them and us? And yet the contradictions are everywhere. Their brains were large, but shaped differently, with smaller parietal and cerebellar regions compared to ours, regions associated with abstract thought, memory, and adaptability, raising the haunting possibility that while Neanderthals could endure the harshest winters and hunt with terrifying efficiency, they may have lacked the mental flexibility that allowed Homo sapiens to adapt rapidly, to create sprawling trade networks, and to innovate endlessly. This is where culture may have been the silent weapon that tipped the scales. For thousands of years, Neanderthals survived in Europe's icy forests, hunting with ambush tactics, wielding thrusting spears ideal for close combat, and building simple shelters. But when the climate shifted and forests gave way to open tundra, their strategies may have failed them. Meanwhile, the incoming Homo sapiens carried bows, long-distance hunting techniques, and crucially, wider social networks, exchanging not just goods but ideas across vast distances. That exchange of information, invisible in the archaeological record but written in the survival of our species, may have been the real advantage. Still, do not mistake their end for weakness. Genetic studies reveal that Neanderthals survived countless challenges for over 300,000 years, far longer than our species has even existed so far. And the fact that they endured for so long in hostile environments should silence any notion of stupidity. In fact, some of their skeletal remains show healed injuries and disabled individuals who lived long past their wounds, suggesting care, compassion, and social bonds strong enough to protect the vulnerable, a distinctly human trait if ever there was one. And yet, when Homo sapiens finally entered Europe around 45,000 years ago, the balance began to shift irreversibly. For nearly 10,000 years they coexisted, trading, interbreeding, and perhaps competing for resources, but slowly, surely, the Neanderthals dwindled, vanishing from the record around 40,000 years ago. Or did they? Remember, their DNA survived, hidden in us, shaping our immune systems, our metabolisms, even our risk for certain modern diseases. This means that calling them extinct is a misnomer. They were absorbed. Some archaeologists go further, suggesting that violent clashes, raids, and even the abduction of Neanderthal women by Homo sapiens may have driven the final merging of the two populations, a grim echo of human conflict that resonates even today. And here lies the unsettling truth. When geneticists examined Neanderthal DNA, they found evidence of repeated interbreeding episodes, some 120,000 years ago, others more recent. Yet with one strange asymmetry, while Neanderthals left their genes in us, no evidence shows our DNA entering the final Neanderthal populations. In other words, the genetic exchange was one-sided, hinting at failed alliances, infertile hybrids, or something darker still. Did we, in effect, consume them? That is a question I will not answer just yet, because the implications are too profound to rush. For now, let it linger. Neanderthals were not shadows of humanity, they were humanity. And the line between their culture and ours may have been far thinner than most of us dare to admit. But if they were so human, why then did they vanish while we endured? The next chapter will unravel that mystery, peeling back layers of climate, biology, and the ruthless edge of competition to reveal what may have been the true cause of their disappearance, and the uncomfortable possibility that our survival came at their expense. Stay with me because the revelations ahead are darker than anything we've seen so far. The mystery of Neanderthal disappearance is often framed as extinction, but the truth is far more complex and unsettling. Around 50,000 years ago, Europe's climate shifted dramatically, forests shrank into tundra, and the Neanderthals' ambush hunting style suddenly failed in the open plains where Homo sapiens excelled. Our ancestors, lighter, faster, and supported by wider social networks, adapted quickly while small, scattered Neanderthal groups struggled to survive. Yet climate alone cannot explain their vanishing. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests violent encounters and failed alliances. Neanderthal DNA survives in us, but our DNA is absent from their last populations, hinting at one-sided unions where Neanderthal women were absorbed and their men erased. Was this war, assimilation, or both? The silence of the caves does not answer, but the bones do. Neanderthals endured predators, ice, and famine for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet within just 10,000 years of contact with us, they were gone. Perhaps their true defeat was cultural. While their way of life remained stable, ours evolved, expanded, and innovated, giving us subtle but decisive advantages. The chilling possibility is that their disappearance was not extinction at all, but absorption of vanishing not into nothingness, but into us. And if that is true, then their story never really ended, it simply became ours. But what legacy did? They leave inside our bodies and minds? That's secret. Neanderthals are not gone, they live in us. Genetic research shows their DNA shapes how our bodies fight disease, adapt to climate, and even how our skin and hair look, though it also leaves traces linked to depression, addiction, and illness. This inheritance is both gift and burden. A silent reminder that their story didn't end in extinction, but in transformation. Europeans and Asians carry different fragments of their legacy, while Africans whose ancestors never crossed paths with Neanderthals carry almost none, proving humanity is a patchwork of ancient unions. And here lies the haunting truth. When you breathe, heal, or feel the sun on your skin, echoes of Neanderthals are moving through you. They are not fossils, not shadows of the past, they are part of us. Which leads to the question no one can fully answer. Did Neanderthals truly vanish? Or are we simply the last Neanderthals, walking the earth under a different name? Neanderthals never truly disappeared, they live on in our blood, shaping who we are. The truth is simple and haunting. They are us, and we are them.